Wriggling. I'm on the board of Orange Audubon, and this is Susan, our co-host today. We have a special guest that we're going to introduce in a few minutes. You're going to absolutely enjoy this program, and we will have the recording available in a few days on our Orange Audubon YouTube channel. And if you've missed any of our bird chats, they're there, and definitely check them out because we've had some amazing programs. So welcome, and we're going to get started now. Oops. So tonight we're going to have announcements. We're going to talk about Earth Day. Happy Earth Day, everybody. We're going to do a mystery bird. It's one of the birds visiting right now in Central Florida. And our program will be on Florida Scrub Jays and Jay Watch by Maria Zondervan. Upcoming programs. Next week, we're going to feature a local hotspot, the Oakland Nature Preserve, with the restoration project manager, Jackie Raleigh, who's just phenomenal local expert on native plants. And she's done an amazing job restoring that property. So you learn all about that. It's also a great place to see birds, and you don't have to hike really far. And May 6th, we're going to have a program on raptors of Florida. Okay. So I would like to invite those of you that are local that we have added a beginning bird class due to popular demand. This was our graduating class from, when did we do it? Was it February? I don't remember. It's been a bit. Yeah, it was a couple months ago. We had one.
Yeah.
You can see it was kind of cold out, but the next one will have nice weather. May 2nd, 9th, and 16th, when you sign up, you get a 3 Sundays. And basically, we're from 8 to 11:30. Our first one is at Orlando Wetlands Park, which we'll do under the pavilion. We'll have half the session. We're teaching you all about bird ID and field techniques and all that good stuff. And then we're going to go out and explore the wetlands. The second session will be at Mead Gardens. The third session, this is our first time doing it. We're going to do the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive with radios. And we're excited to do that. This would be our inaugural time doing that. So I will be one of the co-leaders. And then we have enlisted Jeffrey Gammon, and he is phenomenal.
He is phenomenal.
He's a young birder. We had him out at Fort DeSoto last weekend. You will enjoy learning from him. And so if you want to sign up, you need to email Teresa, because usually our signups are really quick. Or if you don't get that down, you can go to the Orange Audubon website and you can sign up and get a spot. So there you go. Let's see what else we have here. And we just had our birdathon earlier this month. And if you did not get a chance to donate, you can donate. We don't have a final total yet. We will be getting that soon on the total number of species that we saw. But if you just want to donate a flat amount, you're more than welcome to. If you look on the screen, I'll use my mouse, this donate now button, you can donate to our birdathon, and we would certainly appreciate it. So now I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and she's going to cover a couple of things.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to go over lights out for migration. We kind of always think, oh, that's only for the skyscrapers, but really based on some of the research that people have done, buildings that are 1 to 3 stories high make up 44% of the bird strikes that we have. And we lose like 1 in 10 birds during migration to bird strikes. So it's really important to kind of turn any outside lighting, or even inside, if it's shining through the windows, turn those lights off if you're not using them. On outside, the studies show that those yellow LED bulbs reduce actually bird strikes, and actually they reduce your bugs too. So that's kind of nice too, because they don't attract bugs. Close your curtains if you need to, and consider, especially if you're on a second floor, using one of those reading lights, or they call them task lights, to kind of give you light where you need it. And in the future, if you're thinking of changing your outdoor lights, you might want to consider motion activated lighting. Then it's only lit when you need it. And if you'd like to get a little bit more information on what you can do for reducing your outside light, you can check online for our April Orange Audubon Oasis newsletter, and there's an article in there that has a few more details on that. All right, next. And then it's Happy Earth Day, everybody. So we just wanted to kind of go over Earth Day, couple things you can do just to kind of help celebrate the earth. Of course, you know, we love planting native trees, bushes, maybe a pollinator friendly flower to kind of help those bees and butterflies and birds. That would be one good idea. These are like some of the top 5 ideas that I found, and I thought they were pretty appropriate. Eat a meat-free meal. That kind of helps reduce a lot of our intensity of pesticides and fertilizers, because all those grains end up going into the meat, and we might as well just cut that whole step out. Make picking up trash part of your outdoor routine. Take a little bag when you're birding, take a little glove or a little tongs, and you can pick up a little bit of trash, just kind of keep our earth looking good. Pledge to eliminate or reduce pesticide use. So that's something in your yard that you can kind of take a look at. Make sure you're not overdoing. It's real easy. A lot of these companies do like to sell things. We just want to make sure that we're using just what we need. And then maybe see if you can change one thing that would reduce plastic in your life. Maybe switch to that boxed laundry soap, or they actually make pre-made little tabs, or dish soap. Maybe switch to cartons instead of the plastic bottles of milk and juice. Use a carton. They won't be as in the environment quite so long as those plastic bottles. Very good. Thank you. Next. All right. So tonight we have mystery bird again. So this is a bird that's really been visiting us a lot in Central Florida. And you might look up and see this in bushes or low on the canopy. You might hear this song. All right, we already got an answer here. Next. So it's the worm-eating warbler. So there's really 2 diagnostic field marks. If you see these on this bird, you know it's a worm eating, and that's the mustard colored head with the 4 black stripes, or the creamy undertail coverts with the gray spots. Next. All right, so the worm-eating warbler, it's kind of a drab, dusky olive-backed and wings with a relatively flat head. Tail is a little bit shorter than most warblers and is square-tipped. You do see it often probing like dead leaves in the lower canopies. Here in Florida, we only see it on migration. So let's go ahead, and Juanita already guessed it, worm-eating warbler. She's good. So this is the range. So as I said, we only see it in migration. It does breed in the deciduous forests, especially in the Appalachians. And then it winters in the tropical forest. Kind of a smart little bird. It's called worm-eating because it does eat a lot of caterpillars, spiders, slugs. When it's on the ground, and I did notice this year, it doesn't walk, it hops. It does have that real dry insect-like trill. And if you look at it, unless you're hearing something like the male singing, the plumage is pretty much indistinguishable between the male, the female, or age-related. You can only tell by wear because the colors aren't any different. They do breed and nest on the steep slopes. And if a female is in the nest and it's late incubation period, it will not move off that nest unless it's touched. If it's touched, it's going to jump off and do like a injured bird routine where it spreads its wings and its tail and it kind of hops and tries to lure that predator away. So
that about the scrub jays?
Next.
Huh?
And now Kathy is going to introduce Maria for our scrub jay program.
Let me go back.
Oops.
Here we go. All right. So we are pleased to welcome today Maria Zondervan, who serves as the St. Johns River Water Management District Land Manager for the Lake Apopka North Shore. She's also a wildlife biologist with responsibilities for restoration of habitat for red cockaded woodpeckers and Florida scrub jays. She's worked for the district for 22 years. She's going to share about the district scrub jay populations, efforts to monitor and increase them, including Audubon's Florida Jay Watch program. So we're really pleased to introduce Maria, and if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll have her answer those at the end. Okay. So here is Marie. Let me stop sharing my screen, and then Maria can pull it first.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Thank you for coming out to learn about scrub jays, one of my 2 favorite birds. And if you listen to the introduction, you might know what my other favorite bird is. I'm not getting an option here to share my screen.
All right, let me fix it. Hang on, share screen.
Oh, wait, there it goes.
Okay.
I don't know what magic just happened.
Okay.
Let's see. All right, can you guys see that, I hope?
Yes.
All right, very good. So this is a really fascinating bird. If you've been in Florida for some time, hopefully you've had a chance to see it, meet it in person. They're very charismatic. And what's really cool is they're nowhere else. They're just here in Florida. So this bird is solely ours. It never migrates, it never leaves us. So it's all ours. So I saw some familiar names on the list here. I know a lot of you are frequent visitors to Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive and maybe Lake Apopka Loop Trail. So that is my home, so to speak. That is where I work. I am the land manager for Lake Apopka North Shore. And we used to have scrub jays there. We had, at one point, the population out there was 12 families. Those were not all on district lands. On the district lands themselves, we had maybe 3 families. The rest were on private held parcels, but over the course of the 22 years that I've now worked at the district, I have watched that population disappear in its entirety, and that's a real shame. And that's despite tons of efforts on the district's part and lots of restoration efforts trying to hang on to them. But we just didn't have enough habitat to do it all on our own. Lots of neighborhoods around it that were growing up, and finally the habitat just wasn't there. So it made me that much more focused to save them on the properties, other properties that the district had, or we had more habitat and the ability to maintain a bigger population. So we're going to talk a little bit about these wonderful birds. All right, so I mentioned they're non-migratory. They're here in Florida all the time. They are territorial, so they all have a very set area that is theirs and they defend it. During the non-breeding season, they might, wander around a little bit, check out some other areas, but they pretty much always return to their territory. Most of these birds never go further than 2 miles from where they were hatched. So they're very sedentary. So if they lose the habitat where they're at, they're really not gonna do very well because they're not likely to forage off and try to find new habitat somewhere else. There's an occasional long distance dispersal. I think the longest one noted to date was 27 miles, but that is very rare. You can't really tell the males from the females by looking at them. You can tell by their behavior a little bit. The females will do a unique call called a hiccup call that only the females will do. And of course, the females lay eggs. So, if you see an egg fall out, that's probably a female. Other than that, they're going to look the exact same. But you can't tell the juveniles apart right when they come out of the nest and until their first molt. So that's when we survey to try to pick up how many juveniles we've had that year. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The other thing that makes them really cool and really unique is they are cooperative breeders. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So what cooperative breeders means basically is that instead of just dispersing right after the young become independent, a lot of them choose to stay with their family. And so you'll have a breeding male and a breeding female. Those are the top of the hierarchy, so to speak. And then a bunch of their kids, they'll just stick around. Some will stay for 1 season. Some may stay their entire lives in that family unit. And so those kids from previous years, as they grow up, they become helpers. That's what they're called. And they do exactly that. They will help defend the territory. They will help feed their new siblings, the young in the nest. They will help with all the duties that scrub jays have. They will be on lookout. They will do all those kinds of things. And this is really cool. This little family structure is very rare. Less than 5% of birds in the world do this kind of behavior, but we're actually fortunate enough to have 2 birds in the state of Florida that do this. So if you're up on your birds and you think you know who the second cooperative breeder in Florida, put it in the chat. Let's see who gets it. Oops, didn't mean to advance. Oh, I'm not seeing the chat. If there's a moderator on, I could see the chat. Tell me if anybody got it.
We're
I'm
checking.
not seeing any answers yet.
No answers. All right, I'm gonna let y'all.
Oh, wait, yes, we
I
do
saw
have
something
one.
blink.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We have red cockaded woodpeckers.
There you go.
Yeah.
And what was the second bird I work with? It's the red cockaded woodpeckers. So even though I'm not supposed to have favorites, those are my 2 favorite birds. But a lot of it has to do with this family structure, which is so unique. And there's lots of theories as to why they would bring about this type of behavior. I'm going to show you some of the benefits of it. But what we find is that it tends to happen with birds that have very limited habitat availability. So they don't have a lot of room to disperse. So you may, try to disperse and have nowhere to go, or you could stay home and, munch off your parents. I don't know. That might just be my theory. But I'm going to show you some of the benefits that science has proved to this technique. So if you look at the graph on the far left, at the top left there, see territory size on the left axis there, on the vertical axis, and family size on the bottom. And what we find is that as the family size gets larger, so does the territory. Now, why does that matter? Well, the bigger your family is, the more territory you can grab away from those other jays. And again, this is a hot commodity out there since there's so little of their prime habitat left. So they're going to maybe also scoop up the highest quality habitat, and that means more food for everybody. So that's one benefit of doing that. The other is shown by this graph on the bottom right, and you'll see that it says fledglings per pair with helpers on your left axis. And then on the bottom axis, there's this fledglings per pair, no helpers. And it's a little confusing, but basically what they found is in the same habitat, everything else being equal, same time of year, everything like that. If there are fledglings, if there's 1 fledgling per pair in a family with no helpers, you will find that the group next door with helpers will have 2 fledglings. If there are 2 fledglings for a pair with no helpers, you'll find the ones with helpers have 3 to 4 fledglings. It's usually about a 2-to-1 ratio. So having helpers that help feed those young, help protect them from predators, all of that tends to be very beneficial for these birds in general. As far as the individual helpers, what they get out of it is, there's more protection in a larger family, more eyes to see predators coming and that sort of stuff. Cooper's hawks are one of their big predators. Snail kites will get them, red-shouldered hawks, snakes from the ground, raccoons, all sorts of things, bobcats. So the more eyes that can keep an eye out for that and shout if there's an issue, the better. But what we also see is that when these territories get particularly large and the family sizes are particularly large, sometimes the parents will say, or maybe the kids begging from the parents, I don't know how it works out, but usually one of the older helpers will inherit part of that territory. They'll let them carve out a little niche for themselves, and they can bring in a breeder from a nearby family and start their own family there. So if you have a big family and the territory is big enough, sometimes you might inherit a chunk of it. And also when the breeding male dies, a lot of times the oldest male will inherit that breeding position. And then he boots mom to the curb. Sorry, mom. All right, let's talk a little bit about their nests and their nesting behavior. So they tend to nest in, generally in scrub oaks, although we will see their nests sometimes in palmettos, sometimes even in orange trees they've been seen, things like that. They'll use what they can, but if they have scrub oaks, that's their preferred, usually 4 to 6 feet off the ground. So we call it head height because it's really helpful to us biologists who are out looking for nests to have it right at that level. And it's usually this very neat little nest. They're kind of rather pretty. They're made with palmetto fibers, basically, soft little nests. But they're tricky. They will even make false nests. They will make fake nests to fake out coming predators. So they might make 3 nests or something like that. And if they feel like they're being followed back to the nest site, particularly the male, if he's going to feed the female or something like that, he'll go to one of the fake nests and he'll lead the predators there. And then when he thinks he's not being watched anymore, he'll dive down to the ground and he'll walk along the ground or hop along the ground to the real nest, and then he'll pop up there, which makes it really hard if we're trying to figure out where the nests are and we're watching the birds. They're not gonna lead us to them. They're smarter than that. But they generally have 2 to 5 eggs. They're kind of pretty colors. This greenish bluish coloration with the speckles. You should never have eggs in your hands. That is a permitted biologist that is holding those, that's doing that for a research project. And those eggs were no good. So no eggs were harmed for the making of this presentation. All right. So the male and female have distinct roles here versus the red cockaded woodpeckers that I work with. They will take turns sitting on the eggs. They'll take turns feeding, all this kind of stuff. Not so much with the scrub jays. Basically, the female sits on the eggs and then broods the young, and the male is out foraging, and he will bring food to her and food to the young. The female will maybe get up once in the day and stretch her wings and maybe grab a bite on her own, but for the most part, she's tending that nest. So this is how we kind of know when it's time to start looking for that nest, because these birds are rather, I don't know if I want to say friendly, but curious. When we come to survey, they usually come out to greet us. We can usually find them. They come and check us out. And so if the male shows up alone without the female, that's when we usually know, okay, all right, she's on that nest. She's on that nest. So the young are in the nest for about 15 to 17 days, or I'm sorry, they hatch after 15, 17 days, and then they're in the nest for about another 18 days. After that, they will fledge the nest, but they're not ready to fly yet. So this is a really dangerous time for them. They will run around on the ground, basically. So this is where they need those helpers and their parents to watch out for predators and dive bomb snakes if they get too close and all that kind of stuff. So this is very vulnerable. So they don't really fly well till about 32 days of age. So real vulnerable stage for them then. And then they're not completely independent, not feeding on their own and really taking care of themselves until about 85 days of age. Now, I have seen some of them still begging from their parents a good year after they hatched, but I think that's just bratty teenage behavior. Okay. So what do they eat? Okay, so acorns. They are big time hooked on acorns. They love those acorns. And of course, they live in an area with lots of acorns. They will eat acorns for a variety of different oaks that produce acorns at different times of the year. But for the most part, they're available fall and into winter. So the way that they deal with having acorns year round, since they love them so much, is that they hide them. They cache them, is what we call it. So they will hide them primarily in the sandy soils, but they will also find all sorts of creative ways. I have seen them hide them in old trucks that are broken down the field. I have seen them hide them in crevices and trees all over the place. And what science has found, and this is super interesting, is that their brain actually expands in size during this time of the year in the memory centers of the brain, so that they can remember where they put all these acorns. And they've found that they retrieve almost 80% of the acorns that they hide. So I'd like to think the other 20% are out there making new oak trees for us, because they basically planted those acorns. Now they will eat some other things. They will eat insects, and they love spiders. And this is particularly important during nesting. When they have those young in the nest, they need that high protein. So they really need those insects. And they also can't digest things like acorns. And this is a bit of a problem with jays that live in very urban areas near neighborhoods where well-meaning people might go out there and offer them things they shouldn't be eating, like peanuts and birdseed and things like that. Or they may just have a feeder out that the jays have become accustomed to going to. We've actually seen young jays starve to death in their nests with a crop full of food. But they're full of things they cannot digest. And so we ask people to please not put out supplemental food for these guys during the nesting season because they can actually be detrimental to the young in the nest. They really need to be eating those insects. So now they'll also eat some small invertebrates like frogs and lizards and even small snakes. A little bit about their current distribution. So you see that they are kind of in bands, if you think. They're sort of like a band along the East Coast. There's a band through the central part of Florida, which we call the Central Ridge of Florida. And then there's some scatterings in some other places, a little in the West Coast there. And basically what these are areas that were a little higher than the rest of the state. And if you think about back when Florida was mainly covered by water, these were what little bit remained, and they were basically beaches at the time, I guess you could say. So as the waters receded, left behind a lot of this white sandy area, which becomes the Florida scrub, which is where the Florida scrub jay lives. So this is kind of what their habitat looks like, or what it should look like. They occupy really dry, shrubby habitat that we call scrub or scrubby flatwoods. And they're basically these ancient sand dunes and sandy deposits from when the oceans receded. So this is what they're looking for. It needs to be nice and open. They like to have lots of sandy patches to cache those acorns in. They like the shrub oaks to be between 4 and 6 feet of height. And there might be a smattering of pine trees in there, that's fine, but it can't be a pine forest. So you see those openings there are super important for them also, because let's say they're nesting in that oak shrub that it's pointing to there that's 4 to 6 feet tall. Say they're nesting in there. If they got lots of open areas around that, they can see the predators coming and they can all go dive bombing them and scaring them off and alerting the females on the nest and all that kind of stuff. But if it gets really overgrown, they can't do that. So historically, how was this habitat kept low and open like this? If you know the answer, go ahead and put it in the chat there. Who can tell us how nature maintained this low, open, shrubby areas?
All right, James Hill is saying fire.
Fire, that is the correct answer, yes. Yes, and how did Mother Nature create fire? That comes with lightning, right? So we are that lightning capital of the US, Florida. So lightning strikes here all the time. And in the past, when lightning struck, fire would start, well, it still does, but it would often just travel across pretty much the whole state. For the most part, it'd be a gentle fire because it happens so frequently. On average, most habitats in Florida burn about every 3 years. And you got to think about it way back before we got here. It was all contiguous habitat. So if lightning struck and started a fire in one place, there'd pretty much not be anything to stop it unless it hit a creek or a big water body or it got rained out. Today, there are roads, neighborhoods, and all sorts of other obstructions that wouldn't allow that to happen. Then, of course, we have a policy in Florida now of putting out wildfires when they occur. So this is what happens when you take fire out of the scrub. You get this really overgrown stuff. This is a direct result of fire suppression when we have stopped those fires from advancing. And some people like this look. They're like, oh, that's kind of neat. There's trees and this kind of stuff. But for the animals that live in these habitats, this becomes almost unusable. So, you know, I mentioned Cooper's hawks is one of the main predators of scrub jays. They can hide really good in dense areas like this, and they can really pick them up. There's no place for them to cache their acorns, and they can't see any of the ground predators because it's just too thick and too dense. So these days, prescribed fire, that's the mechanism for getting fire back into those ecosystems. This is how we can do it safely and not take out houses in the meanwhile as well. And this not only benefits the ecosystems, but of course it keeps wildfires from raging across the landscape in an uncontrolled manner that could take out our homes and such as well. And the more frequently we put fire on the ground, the less fuel builds up and the less severe those fires are. So should lightning strike and we get a wildfire through there, it won't be as intense. Just as in the old days before we got here, that the fire would be very gentle across the landscape. It would basically just be along the grasses and the pine needles of the forest floor because there wasn't all this other accumulated fuel load that we have today. All right, so this graph here shows a study where they had basically birds followed over the same course of time. And that bottom line shows a territory that was in tall, unburned scrub habitat. And it started off, they had 4 territories of scrub jays in there. And as the years progressed, over a 10-year pattern, they lost all of those territories. So they're locally extirpated. And then on the top, you see that there was an open, periodically burned scrub. And they started off with 6 territories. They kind of went up and down, but for the most part, it stayed stable. So that's what fire does for these birds and for many other critters. Now, sometimes when conservation agencies such as the St. John's Water Management District buys a piece of property, it has been fire suppressed for a very long time. And it's so overgrown that we really can't just go in there and drop a match. It would be catastrophic if we could get it to burn. There's a chance that we could not get it to burn because it's simply too dense and there's no grasses to carry the fires. Everything's been shaded out. So in that case, we have to come in and do mechanical restoration. And this is really ugly when you first put on the landscape. And we get a lot of people calling, complaining, they don't understand. They think we're destroying the woods. They think we're tearing it down to build an apartment complex or something. We get a lot of concerns when this happens. So it's very ugly when you have to kind of restart it, but it comes back really quick. And then you've recreated this habitat. But you usually have to follow it almost immediately with fire. Otherwise, you're going to lose those openings. You might bring the vegetation down, but it'll still come in very, very dense. So this is very expensive when we have to do this kind of thing. Doing a prescribed burn is fairly inexpensive. So if we can keep things maintained with fire in the first place, that is always our preference. But sometimes this is the last resort, and we have to resort to the heavy machinery out there. So what is the status of scrub jays? So they are listed as federally threatened. They were listed by the state of Florida in 1975. I mentioned that they only live here in Florida. So it took the feds a while to catch up to the fact that this bird was important and we need to protect it. So they didn't come along until 1987 with their protection. But it's been estimated that we've lost 95% of our birds already since European settlement. So we've lost a tremendous amount of these birds. So we're going to look kind of where we were and where we are. So these counties that are all sort of in this aqua blue color, 39 counties in the state of Florida, all had scrub jays at one point. In these 8 counties, they're now 100% extinct. Now stay with me, it's about to get messy. All right, still with me? It's messy. But the orange hatched areas, in those counties, those 15 counties, we have very few jays remaining. There may only be a handful of jays still there. They're kind of hanging on. In the orange counties, the ones that are just orange, those we have less than 30 families, but more than a handful. But 30 is sort of the magic number. That's the number that they say you need to have within a connected population in order to sustain them for any long-term time. So basically, we are down to 9 counties that have greater than 30 families that are on some sort of conservation lands where we think we can hold on to the scrub jays. So from the 39 counties we started with, we're down to those 9 where we sort of have some jays to hang on to. So the strongholds here are the Ocala National Forest, which has over 1,000 scrub jay families. So that's really awesome. Then we have Merritt Island. Some of you have probably been out there and seen some of the scrub jays out there. And then the Lake Wales Ridge, that was part of that ridge through the center of the state. So those are kind of the big ones. Maybe some of you have visited Archbold or some of those places that have scrub jays along the Lake Wales Ridge. All right, so when I say hanging on, that's what I mean. So back in the 90s, early 90s, there was about 4,000 groups of these birds left. Today, well, as close as a survey as today as we have, we're still in a decline. We're down to somewhere between 2,700 and 3,500 scrub jay groups. Now, what's a little perplexing is that they're declining even on protected lands, even on properties that we are burning. that we are doing mechanical treatments on when we need to, and we've set aside. There's lots of stuff being done for these birds. Translocations are now happening, lots of things, but still we had that 26% decline. So a lot of people are like, well, why is that happening? Well, so we talked, the main thing that's been causing a decline all along is habitat loss and fragmentation. So that has to do with, they love these dry soils, and those are also prime for development and for agriculture. So we see a lot of the Circes juvenile scrub jay sitting on a for sale sign. It's just super, super sad. But we see that, but that fragmentation affects us even on the conservation lands because they're disconnected from other groups. So this is sort of a prime example. This is Volusia County. If any of you have been to Lyonia Preserve, they have a lot of scrub jays there. This is what that land looked like back in 1943. So that red line on there is what is today Lyonia Preserve. But you can see that all the stuff around it looked pretty much the same as it did. So this was pretty much all scrub habitat with some scattered wetlands in there. Now we're going to bump up to 2000. It's the same place. Look at all that development. So those red lines is what's Lyonia Preserve today. The strong white lines that you see inside there is their attempt to make sandy, white sandy openings. They did that mechanically because they were having a hard time burning out there because they are completely surrounded by houses everywhere in communities that aren't allowing for a lot of burning, and they don't have tolerance for smoke and that kind of stuff. So you got golf courses in there and you got lots of development. So when that happens, if there's a disease or something that goes through the population of the jays at Lyonia, there's no fresh birds to repopulate that if the population dips. It also becomes very, there's a lot of interbreeding, right? They become inbred when there's no other birds nearby to repopulate. So even though Lyonia Preserve is preserved, the habitat management might not be exactly what it needs to because of lack of fire, and they don't have influx from birds from other areas. So this is why even on preserved lands, you may not be able to maintain the population. Here's some other challenges. When you have all these neighborhoods around, you're gonna have some house cats, and you're gonna have more raccoons. You're gonna have roads. We see these birds fly very low to the ground. So they will fly real low in front of cars, and they get smacked, unfortunately, rather regularly. And we talked a little bit about the threat of bird feeders. So having bird feeders around isn't always a great thing for these guys. And of course, the fire suppression that we discussed. All right, so that's the gloom and doom. Now we'll get to the what can you do to help? So there are, of course, things you can do. We talked about the bird feeders and maybe spreading that education to people who live near these birds, but also support for burn programs is very important. Educate your neighbors, not to complain about a little bit of smoke or ash ending up in the pool and things like that, but instead help them understand that that's helping the wildlife out there, it's helping scrub jays, and it's helping them because it mitigates wildfires. So it makes it safer for them to live near those wild areas. Ask them to support land conservation efforts and funding for land management. So we have the money to do the mechanicals and to do the fires and all of that kind of stuff. And then join Audubon's Jaywatch. So this is where the citizen science comes in, and this is super helpful. So how is it helpful? What is it? So basically what it is once a year, every year, certain lands get surveyed for scrub jays. And we do it all at the same time of year. It's always between June 14th and July 14th. And that is not because we want to punish our volunteers by putting them out in the heat of the summer. That is because that's when we can tell those juveniles from the adults. So they will look very different, and they will be done running around the ground. They can actually fly around and come out and meet us. And they only keep that color distinction until their first molt. So it's really important that we survey it during that time period. But by taking a snapshot every year at the same time throughout all these different properties, we can get a statewide assessment of how the jays are doing. And then on the individual properties, we can say, hey, we did this management action over here. Did our birds respond to that? Is the population increasing over there, or is it decreasing? Should we do something different? So getting that helps us. And it's not something we can do alone. Most of land management programs are very, very understaffed. So for St. John's Water Management, for example, the region where we have scrub jays, we have all of 2 land management employees in that region right now. That region covers 4 counties, and I think it has somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 acres, maybe even more. So they're really stretched thin. These surveys are usually conducted 3 days in a row. Could be different volunteers or whatnot, but then we kind of take average numbers, or we kind of double check the data by looking at it over the course of 3 days to make sure we get good numbers. But you can only imagine trying to survey, you know, hundreds and hundreds of acres of property in 3 short days with a staff of like 2. You just can't do it. But when you get 10 to 30 volunteers out there, you can cover that whole landscape and get that data. And we only work between like 7 a.m. and noon, because after that it gets too hot for us and for the birds. And so, you know, in a matter of a few hours, we're collecting all this valuable data. And like I said, it's done across the state, so we can pick up those statewide trends. So, and of course, it also raises awareness about the birds and gets people involved with them and gets them talking to their neighbors about it and gets them to appreciate these birds when they get to meet them up close and personal. So there are, I don't know how old this slide is. I don't know if it's still exactly 87 sites, but there are 19 counties where people participate in Jaywatch. And whenever the slide was made, there was at least 87 sites that did that. So this is a wide-reaching program. So there's a lot of participation. And one of the reasons we say this does more than just protect jays is because we consider them an umbrella species. And what that means is when we protect the Florida scrub jay and its habitat, we're also protecting the other species that live in that same habitat. So we're protecting our scrub lizards and our gopher tortoises and our Florida mice and some of the really rare plants that live in these systems. So there's a lot of people benefiting from this. And there's a lot of organizations involved. These are some of the Jaywatch partners out there. I'm probably missing several, but it's not one agency or one group. It's lots of people that come together for this cause. Now, of course, we are in COVID times. We don't know what Jaywatch is going to look like this year. I don't know if the district is going to be doing Jaywatch this year. We were not able to do it last year, but we're hoping to have some information on that shortly. Maybe it's one of those, if you're vaccinated and you feel safe, maybe you can come do it that way, or maybe we break into smaller family groups, you know, human family groups that are around each other, or we may have some variant of it, but we don't know the answer to that yet. But when we do, we will send that information to you guys to see who all amongst you might wish to participate. I know some of you have in the past, but this is something we can't do without you. So we'd love to not have 2 years without this information. So this is what it's all about. So with that, I will take any questions if we still have time about scrub jays. We can talk about their vocalization. We can talk about anything scrub jay that interests you, or if you have Lake Apopka North Shore questions, I can answer those too, or red cockaded woodpeckers, whatever you want to talk about until we're out of time. So.
All right, we do have some questions. The first one's a long one from Robin. She wants to know if the breeding male dies after only 1 to 2 breeding seasons, will the female breed with the oldest male in the family group, even if it's a second-year son, or will the female go outside to find a mate? And will an adult male from another family group move into the group to become the breeding male?
Well, that's a very comprehensive question. So first off, the breeding female generally does not get to inherit the territory. Regardless of how long into the territory ownership it's usually a male that gets the territory. Now, if it's an outside male that comes in because there's maybe no male helpers, if there's a male helper, he's going to get the territory. But if there isn't one and a male comes in from outside the territory, he may choose to leave that female in place, so to speak, or he may bring in his own, but it won't be the female's choice, generally speaking. I hope that answered the question.
All right. We have another question. Sylvia would like to know, do they use chemicals to start those fires in their clearing?
Well, in the drip torches that you may have seen prescribed burners carrying, that is a mix of diesel and gasoline. So yes, that's a chemical, but it all burns up. So that's the good part. We have lots of other ways that we start fires. It's a long, long list, but for the most part, there's no chemical that's left out there that isn't completely combusted if we're using chemicals. Sometimes it's as easy as taking a palm frond and dragging it around or throwing kitchen matches.
She would also like to know, why is the Florida scrub jay known as the only Florida endemic bird species? I am confused, as I believe the Florida grasshopper sparrow is called the same. What am I missing?
I don't know if we called it the only endemic species. If I said that, I may have misspoken, but it is definitely only found here. So it is an endemic species to here. Florida grasshopper species, Florida grasshopper sparrow is a grasshopper sparrow subspecies versus this is a separate species, not a subspecies. That's getting kind of technical. But whereas, there's blue jays and there's stellar jays, all sorts of different jays, but there are no other, Florida scrub jays, and it's not a subspecies of another jay, if that makes any kind of sense. But yes, you are correct. The Florida grasshopper sparrow is also endemic and only lives here.
And Cindy Bunnell mentioned she's seen them in DeLand.
Yes, yep. We've done some translocations from DeLand on some district properties.
Nice. And Jean wants to know, what time of year do they breed, which I think would be a good time to let your neighbors know not to put out seeds if they're by scrub territory.
Yep, so they generally start nest building in March. We will have some birds that will start early now because things get hot so much sooner. So we do occasionally see some nest building in February, but most of them are still March. Some might wait as late as April on a cooler year, but most of the time we see that nesting behavior start in March. And even if their nest fails, they will re-nest if it's early enough on the season. But once we hit May, they pretty much won't re-nest. So if they haven't nested by then successfully, they won't. And then we'll have the young on the ground in middle of June to throughout July.
All right. And Delcy just commented that it's sad construction is taking a lot of habitat from birds in general.
Yeah, that is very true.
And Delcy is asking, can they be relocated to a healthy environment, or territory-wise, is that not possible? Those are birds that are losing their habitat to construction.
Yeah, so we have started doing that with mixed results. So they are very stuck to the place where they were born. That's really where they want to stay. But like I mentioned, the ones we moved, the ones we translocated, there was a shopping mall and a movie theater going in there. So it was not going to be around. So we did go out there and we captured all the birds. We had surveyed, we knew exactly how many birds they were. And then when we went to catch them, we caught 2 more than what we knew exactly what they were. So they're always full of surprises. But yeah, so we caught those birds and we moved them to another site, which was very suitable, way better habitat than where they came from. But even so, we only retained about 20% of those birds. We don't know what happened to the other 80%. Some of it may have been the time of year that we did that. It was after the acorns had already dropped. So that means the new place where they went to, they wouldn't have had acorns stored. So they may have gone off looking for food sources. Also, where they had lived before was next to a school, and that school would feed them all sorts of stuff. The kids would eat outside, and they would feed them French fries and chips and whatever else. So they were used to a lot of supplemental food, which we were not providing. So could have been a lot of factors with that. One of those jays was actually picked up in Seminole State Forest, not picked up, but I mean, they saw them with binoculars. They had their leg bands on so they could ID them. It had flown all the way to Seminole State Forest, which was a direct line from where we had moved them to, which was Lake Monroe Conservation Area, past where they had been taken from and then straight shot on from them. So we believe that bird tried to fly home, found a movie theater, didn't like what was showing, and so they just kept on going and finally found Seminole State Forest and ended up breeding there. So we're hopeful that maybe some of the others ended up in some other places and bred, but that's a really, really far dispersion that is extremely rare. So it's one of the few long distance dispersals that's happened. What they're starting to do now is instead of just moving jays that are in peril of having their habitat destroyed, they are still doing that with, again, mixed results. We're getting better at it. We're figuring out times of the year to do it and methodologies to help retain them. But they're also starting to try to move just some juveniles from healthy populations to have some extras. So they're trying to take some birds out of like the Ocala National Forest, which is a stronghold, and try to repopulate some other areas or get some fresh genetics in. So it's still very much a research thing, but there's some good presentations out there on it. And it's becoming more and more successful. This was something that was used with the Cockaded Woodpeckers for a very long time and is extremely successful with them, but they're a little less, you know, stuck to where I was born type of birds. They're more prone to doing some distance dispersals.
All right, and Juanita said she really thought it was a fantastic slide that showed the development in Lyonia and all the development inside and outside the park.
Yep.
Jean wants to know, are most of the jays banded?
On most managed lands, we try to keep them banded because that's the easiest way for us to tell the birds apart and be able to get an accurate count. And when you have critically endangered little small population, it's pretty important to know exactly how many birds you have. So we try to keep them banded. Ocala National Forest, a place like that where you have that many birds, you're not going to have them all banded. They would more likely be banded in small sections where they're doing research and just trying to keep an eye on things, but they're not going to ban the entire population.
Cindy Monell said she's happy to help. She is retired and also wants to know why are those birds so friendly, so people friendly?
You know, that's a good question. They're highly intelligent, kind of like crows and those kinds of birds. They're very smart. And so we think they're just inquisitive, and they've had no reason to fear humans in the past, I suppose. But that's probably true for many birds. So we don't really know, other than that they're just really curious. But yeah, a lot of people say they can be tamed, and it's true that in areas where people feed them, they will come and land on your head. And there's lots of people that take pictures with birds on their heads. At Lyonia, they'll come and drink out of your water bottle because water is scarce out there. So all sorts of things like that. We don't encourage people to do that, but it's a natural curiosity. We're not entirely sure why.
All right, and then James Hill wants to know, his comment is, so peanuts are not good for scrub jays and they should only eat acorns?
Well, it's not that peanuts are bad for them, it's that it's indigestible for the chicks. So peanuts during the rest of the year, and again, people, without a permit, you're not allowed to give these birds anything. So people have actually been arrested at Merritt Island or fined. I don't know if they were arrested, but they were fined for giving birds peanuts out there. It's just the time of year. So once those birds are hatching out in those nests, and they need to just be eating insects. And some of the parents, especially if they're young parents, they just don't seem to know that their kids should only be eating that. Whereas in nature, the you know, if you weren't around supplemental food that time of year, the bugs would be very abundant and the acorns wouldn't be. So it kind of just ends up that way. But yeah, peanuts in general, as long as they're not salted and all that kind of stuff, natural raw peanuts are perfectly healthy for scrub jays if they're adults. But again, you need a permit to supplementally feed a protected species.
Yes, and Sylvia said, thank you so much. I'm a Jay Watch volunteer and love it. Presentation has been informative and helpful. And hopefully more people will join. And she can't wait to go out and count again. It's a little bit tough, but extremely rewarding. And she also says the scrub jays aren't that friendly in most of Polk County.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between wild scrub jays and those that live near people and are accustomed to people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I read this interesting article one time about the Florida reforestation in California. And they're, because of the tendency of those scrub jays to bury acorns, they have the California scrub jay.
Mhm.
And they found out that they're really effective if they put out all these acorns and they bury them, and they actually reforested a small area in this study. I thought it was very interesting.
They'll do the work for you, sure.
They did the work. It was a lot cheaper, I think, than, you
Mhm.
know, with the budgets.
Yeah.
We have another question. I'm surprised construction projects are allowed in areas that displace a federally listed species. Does the federal listing really protect them much?
That's a really good question. So if you want to develop an area that has scrub jays on it, you have to get a permit. You have to mitigate for that loss, but you will still be allowed to do it. So they'll go out and they'll survey and they'll determine how many birds live on that site. And then there's some sort of equation, and they're supposed to use that money to buy scrub in other areas and set it aside for jays, or to aid with restoration costs or management in other areas. Sometimes that money doesn't go directly to scrub jays. Sometimes it goes to, say, the Florida grasshopper sparrow or something like that. But basically, these mitigation funds are supposed to offset the damage they're doing on that site by helping somewhere else. I don't know that's a direct one-for-one quote, because you can't really make up for lost habitat, but that's sort of how it works.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. This is your last chance to ask a question of Maria. She has so much knowledge of our very unique and special birds here that are here in Florida. So if you have any questions, this is your opportunity.
While we're waiting for that, I'll just share a cool fact with you. There's some new studies being done about their vocalization, and they've learned that these birds have rather complex language, and they will, for example, they have a different call if they see a ground predator versus an aerial predator, so the birds respond differently. So if a snake comes into the area, for example, they have a call that basically says to everybody, hey, there's a snake, and you'll see all the birds coming towards the snake and start harassing the snake and getting him out of there. It's even different, and if it's an aerial predator like a Cooper's hawk, you'll see them all dive into the bushes and get away from it. No one's going off to attack that Cooper hawk. They know better than that. But they even have, they can even distinguish the different snakes. They know a venomous snake from a non-venomous snake. So they'll go for the tail versus the head, and they'll talk to each other differently. And the dialects for the birds are different in different areas because some of them have been separated for so long. So when we started doing some of these translocations, it was like the birds didn't understand each other quite the same way. It's kind of like some had that southern drawl and some had that northern pitch. So that's a really interesting study, but they've been doing a lot of vocalization studies with these. And when we do Jay Watch, we play back some scrub jay calls to get their attention. And we found it actually matters if we recorded those calls locally or if they were taken from somewhere further away, because it's a different dialect. So just an interesting tidbit.
Very good. Very, as Delcy said, very smart bird.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was very awesome
Yeah.
presentation.
We really enjoyed this. We thank you, Maria, so much for giving your time. And we hope to see everyone next week on our bird chat, where we're going to feature Oakland Nature Preserve. And you can learn about that awesome hotspot and also all the restoration work that's being done out there. And as always, if you have any suggestions on future programs, please let us know in the chat, or you can email us at our website. So with that, we're going to conclude this week's bird chat. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Earth Day, and go out there and do something for the Earth every day, right? Okay, there's my clock.
It's your clock.
There's my clock.